Yo, YouTube, how are y'all guys doing? Today, today, I will, we all will, my two people viewer who watch it will react to this video called Nintendo versus Sega, Evolution of Game Boy Era. I love video games. I love video games.
In the golden age of gaming,
I love video games. I'm a big fan of PlayStation. I'm not a fan of Nintendo. I never played Sega consoles in my life, but I did play Nintendo consoles, and they are fun. I got like all the PS one, two, three, four, five, and the PSP console with me right now. And I will play games with you. I would Ghost of Yote coming soon. I will play War Goose of War. Ninja Gaiden 4, I'll get that soon. Any retro games for the PS2, for the PS1, 2, and 3, I'll play. Yo, YouTube, anybody, you gotta. If any of the EMP members, like Agent or Kai, see this, I want to talk to them through Discord. I got an idea for this marathon for me, okay? I gotta talk to them about this if they okay with it. I gotta talk to them. I thought that'd be my dream, to be honest. It probably won't happen, but hey, let's see how it goes. But for right now, let's react to this video.
Nintendo and Sega rose to the top and collided. With Mario and Sonic at the front lines, their rivalry kicked off a legendary battle that changed gaming forever. It's time for Nintendo versus Sega. Let the battle begin. The year is 1983. The video game market in the US is crashing, flooded with low-quality games rushed out by companies chasing quick profits. But while the West is falling apart, Japan is entering a new era. On July 15, 1983, two consoles launched on the exact same day, completely coincidence. One would quietly fade into history, the other would help save gaming altogether. Nintendo introduced the Family Computer, or Famicom. That same day, Sega released the SG-1000, Sega's first ever home console. Nintendo aimed to make its console affordable, but also more powerful than anything else on the market. And they backed it up with arcade hits like Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye, games people already knew and loved. Sega's SG-1000 tried to compete, but it never stood a real chance. The hardware was decent, just not as strong as the Famicom, and it lacked must-have titles. Launch games like Flicky, Girls Garden, and Safari Hunt came and went without much impact. Despite this, the SG-1000 still sold fairly well, about 2 million units in Japan. But the Famicom crushed it, selling around 19 million.
Yep.
And while Sega's consoles stayed in Japan, Nintendo's machine went global. In 1985, Nintendo launched the NES in North America, a redesigned Famicom with a new name, a sleeker look, and the same mission: take over the market. And it worked. The NES sold over 61 million units and became one of the longest-lasting consoles ever made. It remained on the market in the US until 1995, and in Japan until 2003. The NES didn't just sell well, it changed gaming forever. It set a new standard with high-quality titles that raised the bar for what video games could be. It's almost unbelievable how many of Nintendo's biggest franchises started here. Final Fantasy, Castlevania, Metroid, The Legend of Zelda, and of course, Super Mario Bros. The Famicom and NES didn't just beat the SG-1000, they buried it. But this was only the beginning. This battle sparked one of the biggest rivalries in gaming history. Fun fact, in 1983, Nintendo offered Atari a deal. Atari could redesign and sell the Famicom in North America. Several names were considered, including the Nintendo Advanced Video Gaming System. But the deal fell apart. Licensing issues, financial trouble, and leadership changes got in the way. The contract was never signed. It was one of the worst missed opportunities in gaming history. But for Nintendo, it was the best thing that could have happened.
Yep.
In October 1988, Sega fired back at Nintendo by launching the Mega Drive. In America, it arrived a few months later as the Sega Genesis. It aimed directly at teenagers who wanted something fast, edgy, and rebellious. While Nintendo had Mario carting his way into hearts, Sega countered with Sonic, a blue blur who wasn't afraid to speed past the plumber. The battle for living rooms was on. Sonic quickly became Sega's iconic mascot, starring in 3 of the most popular games on the Genesis. But Sega's library went further, packed with bold, action-filled titles like Streets of Rage, Gunstar Heroes, Altered Beast, and one of the most controversial games of all time, Mortal Kombat. In November 1990, Nintendo responded.
Bro, Mortal Kombat is such a good game. I'm not a Mortal Kombat fan like that, but I do like the game. Like Mortal Kombat X11 was cool. I want to play like a retro Mortal Kombat game on the PS2. But yeah, I want to see how that game is on the PlayStation 2. I think it's like a action adventure game, not like fight game like that. But yeah, yeah.
With the Super Famicom, later released in America as the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or simply the SNES. The SNES had slightly less raw power than Sega's Genesis, but it offered better graphics, richer sound, and some of the greatest games of all time. Hits like Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Donkey Kong Country, and Final Fantasy VI ensured gamers stayed entertained. However, Nintendo's strict rules caused friction with developers, leading some publishers like Electronic Arts to strongly support Sega instead. In the early 90s, gamers split into 2 groups, Team Mario or Team Sonic. School playgrounds turned into battlefields where kids argued over terms like blast processing, even if nobody really understood what it meant. Sega went straight for Nintendo's throat. They released aggressive commercials, including their famous slogan, "Genesis does what nintenDo."
Be free or college free. What nintenDo?
Nintendo tried to stay calm, but eventually fought back. They shed their nice guy image and launched the bold Play It Loud campaign, showing they were ready for a fight. After criticism for censoring Mortal Kombat by removing blood, Nintendo learned their lesson. Mortal Kombat 2 arrived on the SNES with all its violent glory intact, proving Nintendo wasn't afraid of a little controversy. Both consoles started at around the same price. The Genesis initially sold better, especially in Europe and Brazil, but in the long run, Nintendo won the sales battle, with the SNES selling over 49 million units compared to Sega's 35 million. Sega wasn't ready to let the Genesis go, so they tried to upgrade it, not once, but twice. The first was the Sega CD in 1991. And this wasn't just a small add-on, it was nearly a whole new console. It had its own CPU connected to the Genesis and used discs instead of cartridges. That meant more storage, better sound, and bigger games. Standout titles included Sonic CD and Lunar, the Silver Star. But the one people still joke about today is Nintendo's Smoke and Mirrors. It featured Desert Bus, a game where you drive a bus through a desert for 8 hours in real time with nothing happening. It became legendary for being painfully boring. Then there was Night Trap. The game caused a huge backlash. Politicians claimed it encouraged violence, especially against women. The controversy got so out of hand that it helped lead to the creation of the ESRB. But the Sega CD was expensive and failed, selling just 2.2 million copies. Still, Sega wasn't done. They released the 32X in 1994. It plugged into the top of Genesis and added 32-bit processing. Games like Doom 32X and Virtua Fighter looked sharper and ran smoother. But something bigger was already away, and players knew it. The 32X didn't stand a chance. It sold just 800,000 units, an even bigger failure than the Sega CD. Meanwhile, Nintendo had its own CD plans. They originally partnered with Sony to create a disc-based add-on for the SNES called the PlayStation. But at the last minute, Nintendo backed out and signed a deal with Philips instead, leaving Sony blindsided. Sony didn't take it lightly. Fueled by betrayal, they built their own console, PlayStation, and soon after, they would flip the entire industry on its head. As for Philips, they launched.
I already watched the PlayStation Evolution video though, but the next video will react to the PlayStation Evolution and the Xbox, of course, because why
CDI. It was sold as a futuristic all-in-one system, but it was a disaster with weak hardware, awkward controls, and some of the worst licensed games ever, especially the Zelda and Mario titles. It barely sold 1 million units and became one of the biggest flops in gaming history. Fun fact, you could actually connect all three, the Genesis, Sega CD, and 32X, in one massive setup. It needed 3 power adapters, a mess of cables, and probably its own shelf. But if you managed it, it was the ultimate 90s flex, even if it looked ridiculous. The Sega Saturn launched in Japan in November 1994 and in North America a few months later. It had 2 32-bit CPUs and could play CDs straight out of the box. On paper, it looked great, but it was a nightmare to develop for. The hardware was so complex that it slowed everything down. Still, it had some standout games like Nights into Dreams, Panzer Dragoon Saga, and Virtua Fighter 2. There were some real gems, but most stayed in Japan or got released quietly without much attention. Meanwhile, the US launch was a disaster. Sega rushed it to stores with no warning 4 months earlier than planned. Major retailers like KB Toys and Walmart were left out and refused to stock it. Retailers were furious. Developers were angry. Gamers were confused. While Sega struggled, Nintendo came in strong with the Nintendo 64 in 1996. Their slogan was bold: get in or get out. The system launched at just $200, half the price of the $400 Saturn. The 64 stood for its 64-bit processor. It still used cartridges, but the games were legendary. Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye 007, Super Smash Bros., Banjo-Kazooie. The hits kept coming. While the Saturn shined mostly with 2D games, the N64 was built for 3D, which most gamers were interested in. In the end, the Saturn sold just 9 million units worldwide, while the N64 hit 33 million. But in Japan, the Saturn actually outsold the N64. Something bigger was already happening. In 1994, Sony released the PlayStation, and it crushed the competition, selling over 100 million units. To make things worse for Nintendo, studios like Square jumped ship, taking Final Fantasy VII to Sony and reshaping the entire RPG genre. Sony also offered cheaper CD production and fewer licensing restrictions, pulling even more developers from both Sega and Nintendo. The Nintendo versus Sega war was fading, and a new giant entered the fight. But the battle wasn't over just yet. Sega's final gamble came in 1998 with the Dreamcast, and it was a bold one. It was a console way ahead of its time, the first with a built-in modem for online play. It used GD-ROMs, like CDs, but cooler, and even had a tiny LCD screen in the controller that could show game info or run mini-games. It launched with hits like Sonic Adventure, Soul Calibur, and Crazy Taxi. Phantasy Star Online made history as the first online RPG on a console. All of this for just $200. And in the US, it exploded, earning $98 million on launch day. It looked like Sega was finally back. But behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. Sega was bleeding money. Years of bad hardware decisions had damaged trust. Big publishers like EA walked away. And to make matters worse, the GD-ROM format was easily pirated due to a security flaw. Still, Sega pushed on, cutting prices, building SegaNet, their own online service, but it wasn't enough. They lost $400 million in 1999, another $417 million in 2000, and by 2001, Sega was standing on a financial cliff. They needed to sell 5 million Dreamcasts in the US to stay in the game. They sold 3. To make matters worse, the console war had reached a new level. Sony dropped the PlayStation 2, Microsoft entered with the Xbox, and Nintendo launched the GameCube, all within 2 years. The market had become a battlefield, and Sega couldn't keep up. As for Nintendo, the GameCube was their first disc-based console, but it used mini-discs with just 1.5 gigabytes of storage. That was far less than the DVDs used by the PS2. Some games had to be compressed or cut. Online support, minimal. And its playful design didn't help. It looked more like a kid's toy next to its rivals. Still, games like Super Smash Bros. Melee, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, Mario Kart Double Dash, Metroid Prime, and Animal Crossing helped it stand out. The GameCube sold 22 million units, just shy of Microsoft's 24 million Xboxes, but far behind Sony's 160 million PlayStation 2s, which became the best-selling console of all time. Meanwhile, Sega pulled the plug on January 31st, 2001. The Dreamcast was discontinued in March and had sold 9 million units. Sega's 18 years in the console market had come to an end. It was a console too far ahead of its time, released when competition was more brutal than ever before. And yet, Sega survived. That was mostly thanks to one man, Isao Okawa, Sega's chairman. When the company was in deep trouble, he gave them $500 million. Then, in a final act of loyalty, he forgave the debt and returned nearly $700 million in shares. Just weeks later, he passed away in March 2001, the same month the Dreamcast was discontinued. It felt like Sega's console era ended with him. But Sega's story didn't end there. They kept their legacy alive with games like Yakuza, Total War, and of course, Sonic. Nintendo, on the other hand, kept moving forward. After the GameCube, they came back swinging with the Wii. It was a phenomenon. The Wii U stumbled, but their next move changed everything. Nintendo didn't just survive the war, they won it. While Sega stepped out of the console race, Nintendo kept going, breaking records and shaping the future of gaming. From humble playing cards in 1889 to becoming one of the biggest names in the industry, their story is legendary. Want to see the full journey? Check out the evolution of Nintendo, or watch Mario vs. Sonic to see who truly won the mascot war.
Mario. Mario, the mascot, but W video or Flatlight. Flatlight makes some good video, makes some good evolution video. Yeah, that's a W video. W video they made. I might react to probably the other evolution video maybe, but let's see how that goes. Maybe later on, but yeah.